All right.
Hello.
I'm Hugh. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Hugh. Nice to meet you. I'm Danny.
We're a couple of minutes early,
Okay.
but you don't have to kind of worry. Recording will have started, and I can see that participants are joining us already. We will wait a few minutes, but the main thing I want to do to ease my own anxieties is make sure that everything was working.
Yeah.
You see and hear, etc. Uh,
hmm
but in the meantime, we've got about 36 people already, so we'll kind of leave
Okay.
it a couple of minutes. Do you have a presentation? Do you want to try sharing a
Yeah.
screen?
Yeah. I will do that now. Oh, I think I had to request the sharing from you.
Yep, should be approved now.
Great.
Okay, so um, we have one of my colleagues here as well, and a knight who is hopefully in the background helping out with the messages and the QA. I've got another colleague here, Anna Cooper, who's just hiding in the background. But essentially, once you get going, Danny, what I'll do is hide my video and try not to disturb you. Um,
Okay.
if there are kind of questions and things coming in, those of you who are here as participants, if you could try and use the Q&A function if you have questions for Danny. If there's something really pressing that relates to where you're at, I might try and kind of put a question to you straight away, Danny. But
Okay.
equally, for most questions, I'll try and hold them for the end of your presentation, if that's
Yeah.
all right.
Um, is the presentation full screen for you?
It absolutely is,
Great.
yes.
Thank
Uh,
you.
And hello, Anna.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Danny.
Okay, so we're about a minute off the start time. I can see the participant numbers are still going up, which is great. Welcome to those of you who are joining us. If you do have any questions as we go along, what I've said so far is please pop them into the Q&A function if possible. We'll try and monitor the chat as well. But if it's a question for Danny particularly, please put it into the Q&A because it's much easier for us to monitor that. Um, we're bang on 12 o'clock.
hmm
So, unless you have any questions, Danny, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself, but I'll be in the background if you need anything.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Well, hello, everyone. My name's Danny. I'm going to be sharing my thoughts as a neurodivergent behavior practitioner today. Thank you all for coming. So we can get started. Uh, oh, hold on. There we go. So my name's Annie and I do a few jobs. I work part-time as a specialist behaviour practitioner in a community learning disability team for Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. I work in what's called the Enhanced Support Service, which is an additional team to the community learning disability teams where we work with those who may be at risk of admission or placement breakdown. So we work with people more quickly who need more urgent support. I also do some bank work in one of the neighbourhood mental health teams as a neurodiversity link practitioner, and I am part of the Trust's expert by experience group for ADHD and autism. A bit about my background: I've worked in health and social care since 2009, starting as a support worker, then service manager for about 8 years. I studied, went to autism and went to Tizard and studied autism during this time, and then left management in 2017 to specialize in behavior. And I'm still here now. Uh, Despite all the time spent supporting lots of people who were autistic and or ADHD, it wasn't until very recently that I found out that I was too. I was diagnosed with inattentive type ADHD at the end of of 2023, and then later discovered I was also autistic. This had gone unnoticed for the 37 years prior due to my high level masking and research in the female presentation being so limited. The diagnosis gave me a lot of clarity and self forgiveness, but also a frustration about how things could have been different. I started medication in 2024 and it was life changing. I couldn't believe that it was possible to have a quiet brain. And since then, the hyperfocus and fixated interest on all things neurodivergence has been in full force. And last year, I trained as an ADHD coach and set up privately. And I also provide neurodiversity consultancy and training for businesses, advising on neuro inclusion in the workplace, and I also speak at events. So I do talk quite fast. So Hugh, maybe let me know if I'm going too quickly, because I sort of do it without thinking sometimes. So following diagnosis, I began learning the process of unmasking, but I found it really difficult to determine where I began and where the masking ended. And that got me thinking about some of the people that I'd supported over the years. And I felt conflicted as to whether teaching someone a more socially acceptable skill was in fact teaching them to mask. I also realized from lived experience how much energy masking requires and how sustained masking had led me to feel confused about whether I'm feeling my own emotions or I'm feeling everybody else's. And it also led to periods of burnout where I was unable to function or work. I also noted how much the medication that had quietened the incessant noise in my brain had impacted on my behaviour. I was calmer, I was less overwhelmed, I was able to be present in conversations, able to do stuff like this, um, think before I acted and spoke, and so on. And I considered that this would not have been outwardly observable to others as an antecedent because my ADHD type is inattentive, it's all very much internal. And so I would always kind of appear quite calm on the outside. And so when I had these periods of burnout, it just kind of seemed really unusual and people were kind of like, well, you seemed fine, what's the problem? But I knew that I wasn't fine in the lead up to that. And I sort of thought about how that applied to the people that I support. Um, and I thought about the traditional methods of analysis and its reliance on outwardly observable behaviour, and thought, what if we can't see antecedent escalations in distress or discomfort or fatigue? And what if the consequence isn't relevant? And so traditional ABC methods of analysis might not give us the information that we need. So I asked myself some questions, and they were, what is socially acceptable? Who made that decision? Who decided what that means? And does it just mean neurotypical? Is a reduction in behavior a good outcome, or have we just taught the person to internalize distress? What if the antecedent and consequence aren't relevant? And what do neurodivergent people think about PBS? So I went digging. Some of you may already be aware of some of the neurodivergent community's opinions on ABA and PBS, where there have been many lived experiences shared of it being used unethically. There was a recent paper in the International Journal of PBS in spring 2025 called Positive Behaviour Support and the Neurodiversity Perspective, which was an interesting read. And as clinicians supporting people with PBS and implementing it for people who are neurodiverse, it's really important that we are aware of these things, and that we read this paper if you haven't already. So in summary, the themes from this paper were that it was felt that there was a failure to view autism as a human variation, that interventions were deficit focused, that the emphasis is on changing in autistic individuals rather than accommodating difference, that there was a failure to consider autistic experiences, and ABA-based interventions were traumatizing and dehumanizing for some people. Later in the year, there was a statement made by Culture of Care summarising concerns that whilst PBS seemed better, its focus was still on changing the person and not the environment they were in, amongst some other concerns. The BPS responded to this in August, emphasising that poor practice should be seen as that rather than an example of PBS as a whole. The summary of that was that they wanted to, sorry, while we support the ethos of the trauma-informed and rights-based care promoted by Culture of Care, we must also challenge the misrepresentation of PBS in the statement, reaffirm PBS as values-driven, highlight the potential risks of abandoning it altogether, and the call for collaboration and ensuring it evolves in line with neurodiversity. The Culture of Care paper I can't actually find online anymore. That was an old image from a presentation I did last year. So I would assume, I hope, that that is what's happening now and that there is a collaborative effort to keep everybody, make sure everyone evolves in line with neurodiversity. Sorry, I have a very clear script where I'm reading from, and sometimes I tail off and think, why did I do that? But then I was pleased to see in the UK SBA Code of Conduct that there was reference to this too. So for those of us that are registered, it's part of our registration now to be aware of this. And in summary, it said that we do not support efforts to suppress self-regulatory behaviours. We acknowledge the function of self-regulatory behaviour and always prioritise the well-being of the client. We respect and value neurodivergent identities. Registrants advocate for acceptance and understanding, and we do not target any aspects of an individual's underlying condition or identity. Neurodiversity. So we know that PBS is intended for people with intellectual disability. So here are some stats from our client group. The prevalence rate of ADHD in people with intellectual disability is approximately 20% compared to 5%, 5.3% of the general population. The comorbidity rate of ADHD and autism is 50 to 70%. It was only possible to diagnose both conditions in one person as of DSM-5 in 2013. A lot of our client group would have had a diagnosis of one or the other at a young age. So diagnostic overshadowing can mean that often symptoms can be attributed to the other condition, and it means that one may have been missed. Up to 92% of autistic women and people who menstruate meet criteria for PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Not going to go down that rabbit hole at the moment because that's quite another lengthy discussion, and I need to stay on track and keep for time, but it's an important thing to be aware of. And up to 45% of ADHD women and people who menstruate meet criteria for PMDD. Some medications are not as effective in the second half of a cycle. There was some recent research to say that some women and people who menstruate find having an increased dose for the second half of their cycle useful. I'm not going to tail off down there now. So the BPS said that asked how PBS could evolve in line with neurodiversity. This is a quote from Ben, a young man that runs a website called Autisticality. It's really, really helpful. It's got lots of resources. I've got some infographics from his site today to show you, but I just like the simplicity of this. So change the environment that challenges us rather than changing us to fit the environment. There are a few topics I could go into on here. I could ramble on all day about it, but the part I want to focus on today is the neurodivergent internal world. So first up, we've got sensory processing. Now, hopefully, there's a video to show you here. Hopefully it will play with sound. Let me know if it doesn't. Can you hear it? Ah, okay.
So, I couldn't hear the sound coming through, Danny. If I'm honest, I'm not sure I'll be able to help with this very much. I suspect it would be to do with your audio settings.
Yeah.
Potentially, you might be able to change these. You should have an icon in the bottom left, but I'm not totally sure whether or not you can change it at this stage of the presentation. But if you click on the arrow up by your mute button,
Hmm.
a kind of menu will come up, and at the
Yeah.
bottom of that menu, you've got an option for audio settings.
Yeah.
And that is as far as my Zoom technical knowledge goes, I'm afraid. So if you want to give that a try, but it might be that we can't change the audio settings at this stage.
Um,
So someone in the chat has pointed out you have to click the share audio before sharing your slides. Sometimes that works.
okay. I have a couple of videos, so what I might do is just quickly unshare them and reshare them
Great.
again,
Give it a try.
just to make sure.
And whilst you're doing that, would it be helpful if I shared the first keyword so that everyone waiting
Yeah,
has
I've got them coming up as well, but yeah.
wonderful. So, just for those of you who are attending, whilst you bear with us, the first keyword will be wolf. And in the meantime, if anyone does have any questions, please just pop them in to the Q&A function. Okay, and I can also see one of the questions that we had earlier on was just a question about the article that Danny mentioned, the neurodiversity perspective. I answered this incorrectly. So my impression was that this wasn't actually out there in the public domain yet, but it looks like a link has been shared in the chat where it might be available.
There is an option to share sound, but it's not letting me click it. Not
Okay,
sure
I can
why.
try one more thing, which might help, which is if I make you host.
Hmm.
Okay, so you are now host, and therefore you should have all of the powers that I'm able to
Okay.
give you. Give it another try.
Mm, no, it's not working. I'm not sure why. Um, okay. Okay, we just have to, because we're going to run out of time, aren't we? No, sorry, I don't know why it's not like I can see where I have to click it, but it's just not. I don't know if it's permissions or something, but I'm not sure how to change that right now. So
Apologies.
um, I just have to. Perhaps I'll share this when I'll share the slides afterwards, and everybody can watch the videos then. But that's a bit of a shame because there's one coming up that that's quite important.
Apologies. But
But
yes,
maybe
you can absolutely share it.
I'll send the link actually the because the next one's on YouTube. So perhaps I'll just send the link in the chat for that one, and everybody can watch that separately. But this video was a clip, so I'm not able to do that.
Sure.
Um, we can, I mean, watch it with without the sound, I guess. But this is a video from Film Club, which is by Amy Lou Wood on iPlayer. It's really good. It's a really good example of what a sensory overload feels like for somebody. So if you haven't seen it, I really recommend watching it. And I will send you, as I said, the slides afterwards. Watched this video so many times I could probably act it out for you, but I won't do that. That's noisy eating, lots of typing, pens clicking, lots of noises from people's mouths, which is gross. Everyone's singing a happy birthday and told her to make a wish. And she said, your mouth is bleeding. And she says, should we have a chat in private? And here she's saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Okay. So,
Hey, you had lots of people saying not to worry about it and that they were able
thanks.
to follow it, and also that your explanations were really helpful.
Oh, great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So that was, as I said, Film Club, and that is a good representation of the sensory experience. And also, just to mention, it's not when we talk about the sensory experience in and sensory processing in the neurodivergent community, it's not just the five senses, it's the eight senses plus all the extra things that people might be worrying about. So this is an infographic from Ben at Autisticality again, saying something's changed, being misunderstood, lots going wrong, being asked too many questions, having lots to do. And Megan Anna Neff, Dr. Megan Neff, she has a website called Neurodivergent Insights, which also has an absolute plethora of resources. It's brilliant. And she said, she had a really nice explanation of this. She said, for an autistic person, the sensory system is like the foundations of a house. If the system is off, the entire structure will fall apart. If you lack sensory regulation, all of your other systems will be off. Many autistic people experience life in survival mode, trying to avoid and deflect the too muchness of the world. When you're autistic, it's as if your nervous system exists on the outside of your body, fully absorbing every sensory input, social interaction, and piece of information. Although this heightened sensitivity can be a strength, perhaps making you observant, intelligent, and curious, it can quickly overwhelm your body and mind. It's like your internal battery is always being used. In my opinion, I think everybody that has suspected neurodivergence or a diagnosis of neurodivergence and is referred into any of us for a behaviour needs to have a sensory assessment. We know that it's at the forefront of an autistic person's well-being, and we just need to be really sure that where there are any behaviours that maybe stimming, but maybe if they're high risk. So making sure if there's any stimming or self-regulatory behaviours that are high risk, that we have a really good understanding of sensory function and make sure that any functional equivalents suggested are meeting the same sensory needs. So it's not as simple as keeping someone's hands busy. If they're doing something that's high impact, gives them a lot of proprioceptive feedback and a big adrenaline rush. So what happens as a result of all of those pressures is over time, autistic people learn to mask. And we didn't hear the video, but what Amy was saying at the end of that, there was sort of surging music all the way through it, and she was getting more and more built up, and you could hear that she was really struggling. And then when she had that moment where she blew her candles out and got blood all over the birthday cake, and she was saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And obviously she's not fine, but that is like a good example of what masking is, because she wasn't fine right from the start of that, but she just kept going because that's what she felt like she had to do. What's relevant here, what I liked about the masking slide here, sorry, I've got to move it forward there. This is again by Ben from Autisticality. I really liked this one because it has included in it forcing yourself to use mouth words. And I think what's relevant here to mention is the double empathy problem, which was the term coined by Damian Milton in 2012, which is that both neurodiverse and neurotypical minds struggle to empathize with each other due to differences in communication styles and experiences. The majority of research was done by neurotypical brains on neurodivergent people. I know from my experience, I'm socially awkward with neurotypical people, but totally fine if I meet someone else that's neurodivergent. We always seem to find each other and in groups. And, after I got my diagnosis, I was looking around my friendship group and thinking, oh, but that is, yeah, so that was quite relevant to the double empathy problem. Masking, oh, we've already had that. So masking means that is a term that is used to describe how many neurodivergent people repress their natural ways of being. So like forcing eye contact or holding in stims, resisting self-soothing in order to fit in, or because they've been told to follow the rules of a certain environment and praised for doing so. And this is part of what I was talking about earlier when I wondered about sort of what is socially acceptable and what does that even mean. And if you've got somebody that does a lot of masking and is constantly praised for it and thinks they're doing the right thing, and then you have these big periods of burnout, it can be quite confusing. I also know from personal experience, it's incredibly tiring to mask all the time, and it's very draining and it uses up a lot of energy. Prolonged masking without opportunities to recharge can lead to burnout and increase the frequency of sensory overload. And over time, it can cause a person to feel disconnected from their body entirely. So it's important to consider for those referrals where we hear things like, it's odd because on some days they say yes to everything, and then on the others, we can't get them out of bed or even to brush their teeth. And just considering whether a person that says yes to everything actually means yes. They might not. They may not want to do all the things they're saying yes to. They don't know. They just maybe don't know how to say no, or they think if they do say no, that that's wrong and they shouldn't be doing that. They don't want to get in trouble, and it's important to consider masking, rejection sensitivity, energy accounting, and burnout, and how these all intersect with each other when someone is responding to a question that you have asked them. We'll get into those things I just mentioned more a little bit later. That's the first word. We've done that one. So we know the 8 sensory systems. We've got auditory, tactile, olfactory, which is smell, visual, gustatory, which is taste, as well as proprioception, movement, vestibular, which is balance, and interoception. I'm going to talk a little bit about interoception now. So that is the ability to sense and interpret internal states or signals from our bodies. And that part of something that goes alongside interoception for a lot of autistic and ADHD people is something called alexithymia. And that is the difficulty or inability to recognize or describe own emotions. That affects approximately 1 in 10 people, and it is at a much higher rate in the neurodivergent community. It's considered a personality trait, not a diagnosis, but it's influenced by genetics and life experiences. The reason it can develop over time for neurodivergent people is due to excessive masking and prioritizing the emotions of other people over their own, being fixated on getting it right rather than considering how we actually feel. That can also lead to a hyper awareness of others' emotions as a result. And we know that kind of the old fashioned view of autism is that you don't have empathy. And that is one of the reasons why I never thought that I did, because I'm hyper empathetic. But it's actually alexithymia, because I will feel others' emotions intensely. I can't watch heated conflict or heated discussions on TV as it raises anxiety, and I can like cry big tears at someone else's joy or sadness when I'm watching TV, but I don't process my emotions in the same way in the moment. Like if something exciting happens or sad happens, I don't process it then. I process it like later on in the day. And that's something that I'm sort of learning over the last few years, because it's an interest. I never understood why I could cry at other people and not at myself, but now it makes sense. Um, so when both of those things exist in a person together, we may hear things like, it happened out of nowhere. Um, there wasn't any antecedents. She was fine. Um, and that is because escalations in physical or emotional distress might not be either internally observable to the person, so like they may think that they're fine or even say that they're fine or happy, and they're also not outwardly observable to the support until it's reached crisis point. Um, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is high pain threshold. Like quite often we see in people's notes that they have or appear to have a high pain threshold. And I think I'm always a bit concerned about that, because do they, or is it just an alexithymia and interoception and communication differences? And you know, how many of us laugh when we're uncomfortable, for example? Is it how would we possibly know that somebody has a high pain threshold if their way of showing it maybe isn't in a typical way? Um, the next part to consider is something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's more so in ADHD profiles, but as we know, it's about 70% likely that it's comorbid if somebody's autistic. And that is extreme emotional outbursts to real or perceived rejection. It's not a diagnosis, but it's a term coined by William Dodson, and it can lead to low self-esteem, negative self-talk, and in some cases, self-harm or suicidal ideation. People pleasing may develop as a strategy to avoid the possibility of rejection, and that's further encouraged by positive praise for being good and learning that masking and holding it all in is the right thing to do and avoids criticism, and you look compliant and you're just having a quiet life. And this particularly applies to those people who maybe don't like the word no, and it's not as simple as that. And it's kind of imagining if sort of a minor inconvenience in your life or somebody saying no to you felt as like catastrophic as something really bad, and how much that happens, you know, how many times you come across minor inconveniences in your day and how exhausting it would be to keep having to go through that extreme emotional experience. Um, the next slide is a video on executive functioning. So I'm going to just quickly get the link up and send it to you in the chat. So just bear with me 2 seconds.
Just let me know if you're struggling, Danny, because I think I found the video and have a link ready to
Oh,
go. Just
okay.
reticent to jump ahead of you in case I've got the wrong one.
Thank you. I think this is the right. Oh, right. Um,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, yes, I've checked it and that seems to be the video coming up. Do you want everyone to watch it now?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Great. So those of you who are attending, if you could take a few moments just to watch that video on your browsers, that would be great.
Hopefully, everyone's just about finished. Okay.
I've just finished myself and I can see that we've got some notes coming through in the chat saying that people have finished. So yeah, I think you're about
Lovely.
there.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me with that. Um, okay. In reference to executive function, I wanted to mention a little bit more about ADHD. Um, despite the name, ADHD isn't a deficit in attention. It's an issue with regulating the attention and not being able to choose what it's directed towards. I don't have a lot of time today, so I'll try to summarize briefly here. But in simple terms, executive function is relying on the neurotransmitters dopamine and noradrenaline. So dopamine is the one that regulates motivation and reward, and noradrenaline is the one that regulates attention, focus, and impulse control and working memory. That's the ability to hold information in your mind and process it. So, like remembering why you walked in a room, where you left your keys, retaining verbal instructions, making choices you can't see, like do you want to go for a walk or do you want to go for a drive? ADHD brains have low levels of both. That means the brain is chronically understimulated and it seeks activities that reliably produce dopamine or noradrenaline. That can be good stuff like physical exercise, roller coasters, dancing, eating, good food, etc. But can also be things like overspending, alcohol and substance abuse, self-harm, having arguments, saying things you know will upset someone. That sort of stuff is usually followed by remorse and regret, which makes us feel worse. And then the brain goes back to what it knows and does it again. And the impulsivity keeps it going. And that cycle is why ADHD is more prone to addiction. Um, we have interest-based brains, not importance-based, and that is because tasks that are interesting or exciting produce dopamine and or noradrenaline in the brain. That enables the executive function to work more effectively. And if it's boring or uninteresting, we are relying on the existing low levels of dopamine and noradrenaline, and your executive function is not going to be working as effectively. So in reference to how much you can engage with tasks, if you've got an interesting one, you're able to learn and engage with it. If it's not interesting and you're not taking any medication, you're less likely to be able to learn or engage with the task. So it's really not a choice. It's just your brain simply doesn't function in the same way if the task isn't stimulating enough, if you don't take any medication or have any other strategies. So it's important for us to consider that when if you're doing any skills teaching, what are the circumstances? How important is this to the person? Are they actually interested in it? And is the reason that it's not working because they don't see the point and they're not interested in it? So then with medications, I'm not a psychiatrist, but this is my understanding. ADHD medications work by increasing the levels of dopamine and noradrenaline in the brain to meet the need proactively, which enables your executive functioning and mood regulation and all of those things. And that was certainly my experience. And it helped me do really boring things like fold laundry in one sitting without getting up to do like 5 or 6 other things and then forgetting about the laundry and coming back later. But they don't work for everyone and they're not a magic wand. And some people with complex diagnoses aren't able to take them because they're stimulants, not all of them. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. So there's some tips here for motivating an ADHD brain, again by Megan Anna Neff. I've got her website linked to the end. You can get some more resources from her. So as you can imagine, all of what I've just said uses up a lot of energy for a neurodivergent person. All of that is internal, all probably not outwardly observable. So you can see why it was felt that some PBS processes didn't focus enough on it when it came to people who are neurodivergent. I'm sure you're familiar with spoon theory, but I've included some info here. Again, to demonstrate how spoons can differ in neurodivergent people. For example, having less social and sensory spoons. I work from home more often because I save my spoons. I don't waste my social spoons on getting to the office because then I won't have any left for doing any of my job when I get there. And it's important to consider when you're offering things like choice to like routine is soothing for me because it takes the pressure off having to use my executive function spoons to decide what to do. Like if someone says, "What do you want to do?" I don't know. So while we obviously are very rightfully promoting of choice, it's important to be aware that sometimes it can be overwhelming, and some days choices are easier to make than others. And just consider the amount of choices someone is being presented with and if it aligns with their needs. And not just what looks good on paper to just say, oh, we give them choice every day. And I know that we do have people that say like pick from, 2 things. So it's not like out of the ordinary, but I just wanted to mention that because I think it's really relevant. I know that sometimes I'm really good at making decisions and other times I just think, I don't know, help. So when you run out of spoons, that can lead to burnout, which is described here. Shutdown, which would be complete withdrawal, or meltdown, which is what we might know as sensory overload. And so that can sort of be where we come in as practitioners to try and figure out what's happened. So how can PBS evolve in line with neurodiversity? So we need to make sure that our assessment process is neuroaffirming, considering all the things that I've just mentioned. Uh, it's not an exhaustive list, just keep exploring if it's relevant. And focus on making environments more accessible, like our friend Ben at Autisticality was saying, and focus on education and understanding. So bridge the double empathy problem by teaching the team the skills to understand neurodiversity and the complexities of it and how to support somebody with all of the things that we've just discussed. And a focus on self-care for the person as a primary strategy. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, this is just some ideas. So we want to prioritize burnout prevention and recovery. We want to make sure that we're monitoring sensory regulation for all 8 sensory systems. We want to implement pacing systems for energy accounting, track hormonal changes where applicable, ensure there's plenty of opportunity for the person to live unmasked. And if there's a person who's ADHD or suspected ADHD, we need to identify a good list of activities that meet the need for dopamine or noradrenaline. You might want to make a referral to the GP if you think you to go to psychiatry if you think that they might benefit from medication. And that's our last word. And sorry, it's grandmother, in case you need to remember it. I was rushing because I was worried I was going too late, going too long, and now I've got to the end, but I didn't really close it properly. So these are my recommendations for the book. This is the Autistic Space Framework, which is actually made by Autistic Doctors International, and it's for healthcare settings, but I think it's really helpful as a guide for us around what neuro inclusion really looks like. Here's some links for lots of helpful sites. And thank you for listening, and thank you for bearing with me with the sound issues. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and that's my contact details there, should anyone want to talk to me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Danny.
Thank
Um, where to start is my kind of first question. I think there's a lot of quite sensitive issues for us to discuss here, maybe, and I actually think it's great that you've got kind of a block of time to maybe take some questions, if that's okay
you.
with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Um, a bit of context first, just because, as I said, some of the issues are quite sensitive, but in some respects, a sort of similarity between us is I'm also late diagnosed autistic. Um, and I think some of these issues do need to be really carefully discussed. I think there was an awful lot that you discussed, which is really relatable and really helpful within our work. So you kind of started out talking about masking. And I think something that I've often wondered in that respect is particularly where we're working with people who maybe have a more significant learning disability, that people aren't going to be able to self-report their experiences. And it's something that I've often noticed in terms of if we're working with families, for example, they might be talking about how their child has kind of been perfect at school all day and they get home and they have lots of difficulties. And I often think about that in terms of, well, actually, is that kind of the outcome of they're really holding things together in school, but because of that kind of intense effort that goes into what is essentially masking, they're kind of coming home at the end of the day, um, and experiencing something akin to a meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, though, in the back of my head is, are you familiar with the whole paper from 2017 about masking? It was one of the first kind of qualitative papers to explore this. And something that really stuck with me from that one is one of the autistic people who contributed kind of took a slightly different slant on this and said that actually this is something that neurotypical people are doing all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where am I kind of heading with this? I think it's really tricky when you get to that point that you were describing in terms of, well, who decides what's socially acceptable and what needs to kind of change and what doesn't. But I
Mm,
guess after my big, long, rambly explanation to get to this point, I think the really key thing, which I think is so valuable about your presentation, is that if we're in a practitioner role, we need to be listening to people who have those experiences. We need to be listening to the populations that we're supporting, and actively incorporating those ideas
mhm.
into the types of strategies that we're trying to use with people. Um, Big long ramble from me there. I'm not convinced that's a
No,
question.
that no, that made sense. I think it was interesting because I think with masking, like there is an element of it, and I'm sort of learning this myself, trying to because sometimes it's needed, and I don't want to never go anywhere because I have to pretend that I'm not overstimulated. But it's just about making sure that I'm in personally more aware of my pacing system and know like where the limits are, and that will sort of apply to the people that we support because we should hopefully, if there's a big period of burnout happen, be able to kind of unpick how full their schedule was maybe before that happened and all the sorts of things that were going on, and maybe try to make sure we build in a bit more time for unmasking or a few more days off of not any plans or something, just to kind of make sure it's anticipated, not to kind of say nobody should ever mask ever, because sometimes it's helpful, but
Right.
not 100% of the time, I would
I
say,
think
in my opinion.
I think that's a really, really good explanation. I really like the way you've put it. You've had various kind of comments in the chat and the Q&A. I think some people are talking about how important self-stimulatory behavior can be for people
Hmm.
as a self-regulation strategy. And I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. I think we've got a few people asking about some of the books that you've recommended. Um,
Yeah,
we generally do try and share slides after these
yeah,
presentations.
that's fine.
Great. So for those of you who are kind of particularly interested in the links, the videos, the books that Danny's been talking about, she's happy for the slides to be shared. So we will try and make those available to people just to kind of do a bit of expectation management. That won't be today, but we will send them out. Um, Comment from Sarah. She says it's a comment, not a question. She's very aware that in mainstream schools with neurodivergent children, practitioners are often constantly faced with the challenge of not just teaching the child to conform, but often it's the systems around them that are driving that, and the practitioner might be kind of working against the system and not be the one who's trying to enforce conformity,
Mm.
trying to develop acceptance instead. I guess if we kind of do change that slightly into a question, what do you think about that? How, as practitioners, do we approach those things where it's actually us who are advocating for the neurodivergent person, but it's the broader culture and system around us that is presenting a barrier?
I think that's kind of one of the biggest conflicts I have. I work in adult services, so it's a little bit easier in that sense. And I think in schools, it's it's always going to be difficult because the environments are difficult for people who are neurodivergent. Because if, especially if you're in a school with lots of other neurodivergent people, everybody's unpredictable. Everybody's got their own ways of doing things, and it is going to just be a constant struggle, I guess. And I guess if we've still got the our values in mind, we can only do our best with the tools that we have. Um, yeah, I guess that's kind of my answer, which isn't really an answer because I don't really know what the
I,
answer is, but
I
it's,
think I think it is actually, or at least I took it as an answer, because something I guess that I often think about in my own work is focusing on our own kind of locus of control. We might
mm,
not be able to change the broader system, but if what we're doing in that situation is advocating for the person that we support, well, that's the right thing to do, right? Whether or not it's successful. But I kind of understand where you're coming from, Sarah, and I guess it kind of links to a broader thought for me, and this is a tricky one. Um, and I guess that's why I kind of wanted to disclose that I'm also autistic, because I kind of have a dual perspective here in
Mm,
terms of, yes, I'm a practitioner, but I'm also an autistic person, um, which is sometimes I feel that behavioral science, behavioral intervention broadly gets blamed for things that are societal issues, societal prejudices and biases. Um, so the reason I feel kind of slightly conflicted on that is that on the one hand, I do think it's important to kind of call that out when we're experiencing some of those criticisms around neurodiversity and neurodiversity affirming practice. Um, the flip side of that is that I definitely think our field can do more, which is why I really like your presentation, because from my perspective, the most important thing we can do, irrespective of our personal characteristics, is engage
mm,
with the populations that we're supporting. And I've written down all sorts of weird scribbles in the background here and stuff that I'm thinking about. But one of the kind of key quotes that I was thinking of is the Greg Hanley quote, where he talks about the importance of listening to the voices outside of our choir. And
mm,
particularly when it comes to some of those autistic voices, particularly, um, I've learned so much from people who are very critical of ABA or PBS. And I think
yeah,
it's really important that we don't, as practitioners, kind of dismiss things just because they don't fit our worldview or fit what
yeah,
we're doing, but recognize that actually by engaging and listening attentively, we can learn an awful lot and also hopefully improve our own practice.
yeah, definitely. And that kind those criticism ultimately they come from fear. And like so our job is to make people feel safe and supported. And you know, inclusion helps everyone. So it doesn't mean that, something that can help a neurodivergent person will probably help someone that isn't neurodivergent. So it's kind of about just, you know, figuring out who made all these decisions.
Agreed. And firstly, because I'm getting carried away and just focusing on the things I'm finding interesting to discuss with you, but you're getting a lot of comments in the chat about how much people have valued this presentation, how much people are enjoying it, how applicable it
Thank you.
is to their settings. I guess I just wanted to say I agree with you wholeheartedly about inclusion. And also think it's really, really important that sometimes I find when we're discussing inclusion, it tends to end up just focused on neurodivergent people. And again, it almost kind of goes full circle to, well, we're just kind of saying that they have to change in order to be
Hmm.
included. And I think that, again, on a sort of broader level, often looking at kind of organizations or systems, we need to think about as inclusion as affecting everyone exactly as
Yeah,
you say, and it not just being about one particular group that we want to be included, but it also needs to be about educating the rest of the group, educating the collective. And I guess that kind of takes us back to, um, the importance of developing greater understanding societally of different neurodivergences.
mm.
Okay, so does anyone have any more questions? Please do put them into the chat. I am trying to keep myself on track and making sure that we're kind of we've got one question that I haven't kind of put to you yet, which is how would you recommend we adapt PBS plans to better meet the needs of our neurodiverse clients? Would you recommend extended functions section of the plan to more clearly explore the neurodivergent person's why behind the behavior?
Yeah, I have one in the works, but I haven't done it yet, finished it yet. But I think what I would like to have in sort of this is just an idea. I haven't actually run it by anybody yet, but if you have like kind of a profile of somebody's neurodiversity needs, so like the things that I've just been through within the proactive strategies bit, um, and just adapt it as you need to. So you would have a section on executive functioning, have a section on alexithymia and interoception, and just kind of make sure that it is clear what that is and what might happen as a result of that thing, and what helps, in the same way that we would do the sort of proactive and reactive strategies, but kind of spacing it into each part. I also like to include on the first page of a PBS plan for anyone, is just a good explanation of their diagnosis and what that means for them. So, if someone's ADHD and it's inattentive, explaining that that doesn't mean, they might not look hyperactive, because that's not how it presents in an inattentive person with ADHD. And if they've got ADHD and autism, then the impact of having the possibility of sensory overload being a lot higher, for example, just to kind of get teams on side to understand that things like not liking the word no, or having a persistent demand for autonomy, or is not a choice, and that it's important that we support their diversity and understand them as a person. Once I've done a draft plan, I'm happy to share it, just kind of as a guide of the sort of thing that I think might be good, if that's useful to anybody.
I am confident that people would love to see something like that if you're happy.
Yeah.
Again, if you share it with us directly, we would be more than happy to share it with the slides.
Okay.
Um, do you mind if I add my own kind of tuppence worth there?
Hmm. Go
Wonderful,
for it.
thank you. I agree, essentially. I think it's really important that we contextualize people's behavior through thinking about characteristics and needs. The way that I try and do this, and again, I'm not holding myself up as someone who's doing it right or getting it right all of the time, but I try and do it in my formulations in terms of explaining, these are some of the things that the person finds difficult, or some of the things that kind of are vulnerabilities in terms of why they might find certain things difficult, distressing, frustrating.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess kind of going back to the original question, I absolutely think this is what we should be doing as practitioners. It is our role to try and interpret and understand what is happening for the person. The other thing, I suppose, that I often think about with situations like this is that going back to that sort of much bigger question around neurodiversity and that kind of balance between behavior change and acceptance. I often think that a big part of our role as practitioners isn't about trying to change the person's behavior. In fact, I'd argue that actually PBS is more about changing the behavior of people in the broader context than it necessarily is the person receiving
Yeah.
support. But often it's about interpreting the things that someone is doing and trying to develop the understanding in the network around them. Because all the things that might be kind of helpful in terms of there were some behavioral strategies that you were talking about in terms of how to support people who are struggling with executive function differences. But I often think on a basic level, unless we can help caregivers understand why, then actually we're asking them to be compassionate, but you can't be compassionate if you don't understand why. That's part of what
Mm.
compassion is. It's understanding why and trying to act in a way that's congruent with that. So I think very long-winded response to your question, whoever it was who asked it in the first place. But actually, yeah, I think that's a key part of our role, that it shouldn't always be about we need to change someone else's behavior. Sometimes it's about just trying to develop that understanding of, well, this is why this person's finding these things difficult. And sometimes it might be more about supporting them through it rather than trying to change them.
Yeah, I've had the best from working in services. I had the best outcomes with difficult behaviors with when I increased empathy and understanding in staff teams, and fear, like where people were scared about what was happening because it was quite intense, and giving them the tools to understand why it's happening and have the empathy to understand why it's happening was more effective than trying to change the person's behavior, because once that tension went away, when the behavior started escalating, it meant that they calmed down a lot quicker, because there was not, everybody wasn't scared anymore. Both people, the service user and the staff team.
Absolutely. I think that is a wonderful place for us to bring things to a close. I think that is such a great description of what we should be trying to do as practitioners. Um, Thank you so much, Danny. Really, really appreciate your time. Really, really enjoyed the presentation. You are getting an awful lot of thank yous and people
Thank
who
you,
are
everybody.
who found it really, really valuable. So thank you very much to all of you who've attended, and we'll see you later in the day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.